That was me right after having laparoscopic surgery for stage 4 endometriosis. The surgeon found endo basically everywhere. My ovaries, my bowels, my appendix, ureters, kidneys, and even on the nerves going all the way to my lower back. I've had horrible period pains for years, but I didn't know that something was wrong because I grew up thinking period pains were normal, which delayed my diagnosis by over a decade. And guess what? I'm not alone. There are millions of people out there just like me. In fact, 1 in 10 people have endometriosis. So chances are there is someone in your immediate circle who has endometriosis, whether they know it or not. Yet, for a disease that affects so many people, there is shockingly very little research on it, and more importantly, there is currently no cure. So I started asking questions, and those questions led me here to this lab in Long Island, where scientists are revolutionizing how we diagnose this under-researched condition, and at the heart of it is period blood. Today, I'm taking you inside the lab that's decoding what our bodies have been trying to tell us all along, that the very thing that we've been taught to hide, period blood, might hold the key to healing millions of people around the world. What they showed me challenged everything I thought I knew about periods, like how menstrual blood is fundamentally different from regular blood in a legit superpower way, and how this research could transform period blood from medical waste into a medical breakthrough for diseases like endometriosis. Trust me, after this video, you'll never look at periods the same way again. For those who don't know, endometriosis is when tissue similar to your uterine lining grows where it shouldn't.
It's actually made of cells that look just like the uterine lining. That's why we call it endometriosis. It looks like the endometrium growing outside of the uterus. Only the endometrium is found in the uterus. It shouldn't be growing outside. The uterus is a mostly closed organ, but it's not completely closed. We have these fallopian tubes that are open, and it's believed that retrograde menstruation could release some of these tissues, the endometrial tissue, the uterine lining tissue, into the pelvic cavity. And that's where 85% of endometriosis lesions are found. So it wouldn't be surprising that that's where they grow. They've also done studies where people have blocked fallopian tubes on one side, so they only have endometriosis on one side of their body. Wow. It's very interesting. And we know in baboon model, they actually menstruate like humans, and they get endometriosis, and you can rapidly induce it by injecting uterine tissue into the pelvic cavity. So most animals do not menstruate. Only about 3% of all species menstruate, and that includes humans, some non-human primates, a few bats, and a little elephant shrew. And we all wonder why we menstruate, but that has yet to be solved. But what's unique is that most of those other species, no one's ever identified endometriosis in them. So there's something unique about menstruating and endometriosis. And we believe that there are many ways to developing endometriosis. Retrograde menstruation is just one theory out there. So it doesn't matter which path it is to get there. We believe, based on the scientific evidence, that the endometrium is different in patients with endometriosis.
Dr. Christine Metz is the co-lead investigator of the ROSE study, which stands for Research OutSmarts Endometriosis. You may have heard of it as a study funded by Padma Lakshmi's organization, EndoFound. But why is diagnosing endometriosis so important? Okay, pause, because this next part is really important. The average person with endometriosis waits 7 to 10 years for answers. 7 to 10 years.
The average age of diagnosis right now is like 28 or 30 years old. That's not a young person.
No.
These people have been suffering now 15 years or longer with their condition. That's not an early diagnosis. So we have to do better than that.
And the only way to know for sure if you have it? Surgery. They literally have to cut you open and look around.
I mean, I don't know many other disease states where you need to go through exploratory surgery to get a diagnosis.
As you said, it's a very invasive surgery for diagnosis. And currently, the treatment for endometriosis is pretty similar, at least the pharmacologic treatment, the medicine treatment for endometriosis is simple hormones, some more aggressive hormone treatments, but it's similar if you undergo the surgery or not. And a physician can decide that you have endometriosis-like symptoms and treat you with hormones to see if you respond to it.
I see.
And that's how many people get treatment, whether they undergo the diagnostic surgery or not.
See.
Now, the good thing about the surgery is, as you said, the lesions are actually removed. And that's another therapy. But it's usually held for only those who have severe symptoms.
I see.
So a typical patient who has mild to moderate symptoms that they can manage without staying home from school or staying home from work, they may not undergo the surgical treatment. So we call that either excision surgery or ablation surgery, depending upon what the surgeon is doing.
Right.
But it's a very successful treatment for people with severe disease. So the gold standard is laparoscopic surgery. We call it a gold standard, but we have to be careful not to really consider it gold because it does have some inaccuracies that people don't quite understand. So in approximately 20% of people, they're not diagnosed. So that it's not uncommon for people to undergo the diagnostic surgery more than once before they're diagnosed.
Wow.
And then once they're diagnosed, your follow-up question was whether people undergo excision surgery multiple times. We have people in the ROSE study who have gone under the excision surgery up to 8, 9 times.
My goodness.
And it's not uncommon for people to undergo it 2 or 3 times.
Wow.
And I've also heard wonderful stories that people undergo the surgery once and they have an amazing response. But it's really important to seek out somebody who is really specialized in that surgery. Minimally invasive gynecologic surgeons, we call them MIGS experts. They're experts at many, many things. They remove fibroids, they tie people's fallopian tubes. They do a lot of different surgeries, so you really want to find somebody who specializes in endometriosis surgery itself, because they'll be the best to find it and the best to remove it, because that's what they're doing all the time. And I think that's what's required for this condition, that people really, particularly those with severe symptoms, they really need to be seen by the experts in the field.
So Dr. Metz and her co-director, Dr. Gregerson, had this wild idea. What if instead of cutting open your body to search for endometriosis, you could just let the endo come to you?
Okay, so this is the coordinator's office where all the samples arrive each day.
Hi there.
Hi.
Amber.
Nice to meet you, Amber.
Christine.
Nice to meet you, Christine. Wonderful.
So we got a sample that we'd really like to show you.
yes.
Christine, you want to show them? Yeah, I'll take you to the bio and
Amazing. So everything gets sent here, and that's the menstrual effluent. You guys say effluent here, right?
Yep, menstrual effluent,
Okay.
which is simply menstrual blood.
Yeah, perfect.
There were a couple papers published that described the immune cells in menstrual blood. And we thought, wow, that's where we got to go, because scientists have long said that the endometrium, the uterine lining, is different in women with endometriosis compared to people who don't have endometriosis. So it seems very obvious to study the shed uterine lining to learn that difference and what's causing it, or to use it as a diagnostic tool.
If you have endometriosis, those cells are probably in there. Your body is basically sending you a monthly diagnostic report. And the ROSE team, they figured out how to read it. They discovered that menstrual blood from people with endometriosis have completely different cellular signatures, like a fingerprint for the disease. But here's the part that blew my mind. When Dr. Metz started this research, she couldn't find a single guide on how to study menstrual blood. Not one.
The women's health research, like that is a component and that's getting better. but the whole research on menstrual fluid in general was pretty much non-existent, am I right, until you came along. So how does one
It wasn't.
enter?
It wasn't even totally non-existent. It's an ironic story, and I was telling Julianne earlier today that the original studies with menstrual effluent or menstrual blood were to isolate stem cells.
Oh,
And what did they
right.
use these stem cells for? They banked them and were using them in preclinical animal studies for ischemic heart attacks,
Wow.
brain ischemia, all sorts of ischemic injuries. They weren't trying to understand the uterus. They were using them as a place to get these stem cells
Yeah.
so they could be used for everybody
Yeah.
and every person's disease, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah.
That's what the first studies that I saw in menstrual blood, they were in regenerative medicine.
Wow.
So that's where we started out in 2013. We didn't know how to collect menstrual blood. We didn't know how to ship it. We did not know how to process it. You saw it very smoothly go through a process today.
It's literally down to a science at this point.
It's down to a science. Well, back then we were just implementing anything that came along, and it would take us all day to process a specimen.
Wow.
All day, because we really didn't know what we were doing. And in fact, why we call it menstrual effluent and not blood is that it actually has tissue in it. We didn't even discover that in our first couple years of working with it.
Really?
We just worked with the flow through. We just discarded what we called the debris, not realizing that that was endometrial tissue. It's a biopsy of the endometrium. And so we learned down the road what we were working with.
Right.
It was a lot of fun, actually.
I'm sure it is.
But there were frustrations too,
course.
because we really had no idea what we were doing. And it was difficult to encourage physicians to recruit patients for us. They didn't feel comfortable recruiting patients to give their menstrual blood for a study or use a menstrual cup or discuss a menstrual cup.
Right.
In 2013, it wasn't as common as a menstrual cup is today.
Yeah.
Today, most people have heard about it, but we actually met gynecologists in 2013 that didn't know what a menstrual cup was.
Really?
And that was interesting.
That is
I mean,
interesting.
that was interesting. We learned a lot from that experience.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. We've been sending rockets to space since the 1960s, but no one had figured out how to properly collect and analyze period blood for medical research.
You know, when we first told people at scientific meetings that we studied menstrual blood, trust me, they laughed. They laughed. Scientists laughed at us. And now it's interesting because those same scientists are calling us on how do you do this? How do you do this?
They weren't just creating a test, they were inventing an entirely new field of science.
Before this, there was no protocol, correct? Like at all. So you had to literally create a protocol for this. How did you even go about that, and how long did it take to get to this point where I saw this whole process today?
Well, let's see. We started in 2013, and now it's 2025. So, and we published our single cell paper in 2022. So it took less than 10 years for us to be very productive. I would say maybe in 5 years we were productive in trying to understand what we were doing and asking the right questions. I mean, half of science is really asking the right question. If you ask the wrong question, you just go down little rabbit holes. So asking the right question is so critically important. And you really have to have a handle on what you're studying.
After years of trial and error, they finally cracked the code.
And the major differences that we have seen in menstrual blood are increased markers of inflammation. So that's also been reported in the literature. We see increased numbers of senescent-like cells. Senescent cells are like zombie cells. They don't proliferate, so you think, oh, they're not so bad because they're not going to be growing and going crazy, but they secrete lots of bad stuff. And senescent cells have been implicated in all of the conditions of aging. So yes, and all the conditions of aging, so we call it inflammaging, so all the chronic disease conditions. And so most people believe that senescent cells are only found in the elderly, but we've actually found senescent cells in the endometrium that is discharged as menstrual effluent. We think part of that could happen when Every single month, the endometrium has to regrow itself in order to be a place for a little embryo to come along and be shed every single month. So that replication process that's so rapid could produce some senescent cells.
They found 4 major differences between menstrual blood from people with and without endometriosis. First, healthy controls had more normal stromal cells, which are special cells that help the uterus prepare for pregnancy, whereas patients with endo had more abnormal ones.
Stromal cells are really critical for fertility because every single month, in menstruators only, our stromal cells in the uterus undergo a differentiation process, and they become from these little thin spindly cells to these big, thick, juicy growth factor producing cells that when a fertilized embryo comes along, it can implant. So if that process is not going properly, then the embryo can't implant, and hence you have infertility. And this impaired differentiation process has been identified in patients with endometriosis, and we can study that through menstrual blood. So you saw the cells underneath the microscope, right? Those are the stromal cells, and we can induce them to differentiate in the laboratory, and we can study the cells from a patient with endometriosis versus a healthy control, and you could see differences in just how they respond to that process.
Second, and this was new information, healthy controls had more uterine natural killer cells, which are crucial for fertility. Third and fourth, endometriosis patients had more T cells and B lymphocytes, which is indicative of chronic inflammation of the body, which tracks since endometriosis is known to be an inflammatory disease.
So those are like the major markers that we see in menstrual effluent. There are many more.
I'm sure.
We use a process called single-cell RNA sequencing, which is a very sophisticated method of isolating every single cell and then defining every mRNA transcript in every single cell.
Wow.
Okay, so that's the whole transcriptome of every single cell. So the immune cells, epithelial cells, stromal cells, every kind of cell that's in the endometrium that is pushed out as menstrual effluent. And all that data for one person could fill half this room. It's a huge amount of data. And then we have to sift through it and figure out which cell is which and which gene expression goes with which cell type. And so that's how we have come up with this very unique understanding of the endometrium, that this is a biopsy of the uterus at the time of menstruation, which is when it's being pumped into the pelvic cavity at the same time through the fallopian tubes. And we get a snapshot of all the cells and what their gene expression patterns are.
These cellular differences aren't just academic. They are the evidence that can potentially identify endometriosis with high accuracy and the foundation of what could become the first ever non-invasive diagnostic test for endometriosis. But the journey isn't over.
So right now we have ROSE 2, Research OutSmarts Endometriosis 2, and for that study we are enrolling patients who are symptomatic, who are considering undergoing laparoscopic surgery, so they're actually visiting with a laparoscopic surgeon to undergo diagnostic surgery. In the ROSE 2 study, I should say that we collect menstrual effluent from patients before they undergo the surgery, and then we're able to compare our results to the gold standard.
So how often do you guys get samples typically?
Usually about 2-3 times a day.
2-3 times a day?
It's about 2-3 times a week.
A week, okay, yeah.
But it depends on really when people have their periods. It's funny because I feel like a lot of people's periods sync up.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Wow. So this is where the magic happens.
Yeah, we're gonna give this to Rixie. She's going
Hi, Rixie.
to work on the sample for us.
Okay, wonderful.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely.
All right, so this is a fresh menstrual effluent sample that was collected yesterday and shipped overnight and received here this morning. So Rixie is going to process it. And the one thing that is different between blood and why we say menstrual effluent is that the menstrual effluent actually has tissues of the endometrium in it, the lining of the inside of the uterus.
Right.
And that's what we study. So Rixie is going to remove the menstrual blood or menstrual effluent, and she's going to pour it over strainers.
Okay, wonderful.
And the tissue will be trapped on the strainers.
Okay.
And then the free cells will go through.
Right.
The free cells she's able to grow in the tissue culture. Yeah, there we go. So there's a nice sample.
Sample looks like.
Wow. So you don't really need that much. That's really interesting.
No, honestly,
That's a decent 5 ml sample, right? It's about average.
Right.
So people wear a menstrual cup, which is typically how we collect here,
Okay.
for anywhere between 4 and 8 hours, like overnight. So that would be the typical thing. Somebody sleeps in the cup overnight, or sometimes they do back-to-back collections. They collect all afternoon and then they collect all night for us.
see.
And then they ship both samples separately.
Oh, okay.
But I would say the typical is about 5 to 6 mLs.
Yeah.
And a high volume would be 20 mils.
yeah,
But we've gotten them. We've gotten a lot of them.
yeah.
And in fact, heavier flow is sometimes a risk factor for endometriosis.
Right.
It's kind of a known risk factor.
All right.
Now, if people are on the pill, they tend to have much lighter periods. But I don't know about this particular participant.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna separate this into the ME flow through, which is just gonna be blood, and separate out the tissue.
So what you actually are keeping is that top portion, is that right?
So we're gonna use the bottom portion to grow cells from.
Okay.
So I have culture flask set up here. That's what I'm gonna use to add here. And then the top that'll get stuck into the strainer is what I'm gonna use as the tissue source. And that will go through the rest of the protocol.
Got it.
We would love to see this get FDA approved. Like we would love to see that. So is that something that we can look forward to on the horizon? What needs to happen before we get there?
We just received from the NIH a RADx grant, and we're very excited about that, and that will help us get this to the FDA, because it's a big step to go to that, and that our endometriosis risk score is the best it can be, and it'll probably be refined with time. And what's interesting, I think we're going to learn more about uterine health. We may be able to understand other uterine health disorders at the same time.
Oh, that would be amazing with PCOS, and the list just goes on.
Yep.
Here's the frustrating part. To get FDA approval, the Rose team needs to validate their test against the gold standard, which is surgery. So they need people who are already scheduled for laparoscopic surgery to provide samples first. So it's a bit of a scientific catch-22. As you might imagine, the pool of people who meet this criteria is not the largest. So now the Rose study is actively recruiting patients for their prospective trial, and the process is pretty seamless.
Currently, we use a menstrual cup that is commercially available. We also have an external sponge that people with pelvic pain that can't insert anything can use, and that teens can use, because we also enroll teens into the Rose study. But we believe that we actually need a clinical collection device for collecting menstrual effluent. And we're collaborating with Calla Lily, which is a UK company, in developing such a device. And it'll be a first of its kind for clinical collections.
Wow.
Rather than using a commercial grade feminine hygiene product for collection. It'll be specifically designed for that purpose. So everybody can enroll in the study through a portal. They fill in questionnaires, they fill in a consent. There are no study procedures done until people actually sign a consent and say they are participating. So then they go on to complete questionnaires about their periods, about their gynecologic health, whether they would be interested in trying or often use a menstrual cup. And then we try to figure out what size would be best for them. And we ship them a package with the very detailed instructions on how to collect your menstrual blood at home. And we often give them a sponge and a cup if they're hesitant about using the cup and have endo. The sponges we have less success with, but it's always worth a try than not getting anything from patients. So we're willing to try.
Amazing. You're still recruiting.
Yep.
And so how can people get in touch with you if they want to be enrolled in either Rose or Rose 2?
So they can Google Rose and endometriosis, or Rose Feinstein, Rose Northwell, but Rose endometriosis will get them there. And we have a landing page for people. As long as you're in North America, you can participate in the Rose study. We just need samples to arrive within 24 hours of collection.
If you're scheduled for laparoscopic surgery for possible endometriosis, you could help make history. Scan this QR code to connect with the Rose study team about submitting a sample before your procedure. I've also put their contact information in the description below. What really gets me is that we've had the answer flowing out of our bodies every month. We just needed someone to pay attention. Maybe menstrual blood isn't just waste, it's the most overlooked diagnostic tool in modern medicine. When I got my diagnosis, I had two feelings hit me at once. Relief, because finally someone believed my pain was real, but also anger. Angry that it took this long to get answers.
I mean, not only are we very much interested in improving the diagnosis for patients, but we're also very interested in the infertility that people experience and how we can better improve that and come up with better treatments. And I think half of the problem is that we don't understand the disease well enough to come up with better treatments. So right now the treatments are hormone-based. They are FDA approved to treat pain. They are not FDA approved because they halt disease.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, most people do not know that. They are FDA approved for pain, and that was the end point of all of the studies that they were tested in. We believe by testing menstrual effluent before and after a treatment, we could learn how it's been modified and maybe better understand people's responses to therapy. And we look for alterations or abnormalities in the menstrual blood that we think we could correct. So we have studies that are ongoing in the lab looking at ways to better treat this disease rather than using hormones, which many people find very challenging to stick with. And in fact, when we started it in 2013, I would say 80% of the patients who had endometriosis were on hormones. And now it's many fewer. Many fewer. Yeah. I think people have tried, they go from one hormone to another to another. And really, if it's only managing their pain, then maybe they would be better off with pain medications. And we truly need better clinical trials to know whether these hormone therapies do stop the disease or slow the disease. And the only way you could do that is in young people where the disease is new. And believe me, it hasn't been done because there's no early diagnosis. The average age of diagnosis right now is like 28 or 30 years old. About 20 to 30% of the population does not respond to hormone therapy.
Really? Okay.
And so we just haven't had the clinical trials to prove that hormones stop the progression of the disease. Theoretically, they should, but we don't know. It's never been done. No one had laparoscopic surgery before they started hormone therapy, and 6 years later. It's never, the studies have never been done. Unfortunately, the clinical trials in the endometriosis area have been very small, and only recently some new drugs have come out. Again, they're all hormone-based. And what's the end point? Pain.
That's so interesting.
So they only know from pain.
Okay. So it's not the end point is not about progression or monitoring progression at all.
They don't test it. But that's, I think, the beauty of menstrual blood. We can easily monitor that if people continue to menstruate. However, if they take hormones that prevent them from menstruation, they may not.
This video isn't just about endometriosis. It's about recognizing that women's bodies contain valuable information that medicine has systematically overlooked. I mean, what other breakthroughs might be waiting if we simply paid more attention?
Whenever there's a train derailment or a terrible chemical exposure in the United States, if I had funding, that's the thing. I would want to try to get people's period blood and compare it to us, over time. Because I'm even learning about people in California whose houses didn't burn down during the last wildfires, and their houses are filled with arsenic and lead and everything else. And their insurance companies say you can live there, but they really can't.
No.
Because there's such really serious environmental exposures from the electric car batteries that gave off all these bad toxins. There's just a lot of toxins in the air for people.
Oh yeah,
they were full-scale respirators in their homes.
It's horrible. And it's going to be there for a while. Like even the fire foam has PFAS in it. That's going to go into the groundwater.
That's forever chemical.
It's forever.
That's found, by the way, that was found in menstrual effluent.
Really?
PFAS, yep. And it could have only been there for a month because it was shed, right? It's shed once a month. It's just what people are exposed to in the last month.
That's amazing. It's kind of like a history, like a record of everything, at least in that, as you said, in that last month.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Okay, now I'm sorry to get off topic, but this is very interesting to me. But for women who do choose not to menstruate or they're on an IUD or something, what does that mean? Like, how does that relate to that? Like, is it just
Nobody
stuck
knows.
there?
Nobody knows because nobody's studying it.
That's so curious.
Nobody's studying it.
I would love to know more.
The paper that Shruti Malangaya, we co-authored a paper with her and looked at the environmental contaminants in menstrual effluent, and it was pretty shocking. Every single contaminant you can imagine was there.
Wow.
And it was different in different people. So obviously, people who live near a highway will have more exhaust type things, and people who live in a city will have a different profile than people who live in the rural area.
Wow.
It's very interesting.
That is incredibly interesting. And that might be a conversation to have, like maybe we should be having periods. Maybe we should be talking about that more. And that could be a whole change in the landscape of medicine and healthcare of how we do protocols around this.
Well, I think the new concept that the young people don't want periods, that's, it's been around for a bit, but we don't know what that's going to result in, because I think it's, right, you talked about the original IUD, the copper IUD, what was it called?
The Dulcan Shield.
The Dulcan Shield. That we considered the devil, and it was designed by men to harm women, right? Is what we thought in our heads. And I remember my daughter came home from college her first semester and said she wanted an IUD, and I practically flipped out and I said, "Are you kidding me?" But that's what all the college students wanted.
Absolutely.
And of course, they're a completely different, safer IUD now, and of course, she got one. But but that's what the young folks prefer. It would be wonderful to have treatments that are tolerable and effective and don't have off-target effects. We've thought about delivering treatments vaginally so that it could go right to the uterus, right where we would want it to.
Right.
And that's kind of our dream, because hormones delivered that method are very effective. So I think we have a lot to learn on better treating this condition. I think we have to understand it better first to come up with the best treatments. And of course, in the ideal world, you have prevention, right? And you utilize it. So I think if we could come up with better treatments, we will get closer so that you would be able to treat people to prevent it.
Yeah, God forbid we do preventative medicine.
Right. But that's like the biggest dream of all. That you could prevent this from happening to the next generation.
That'd be incredible.
I think all mothers would only wish for that for their children in the next generation.
1000%.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end this. So thank you, Christine. This was incredible. And thank you to your entire team for allowing us to mosey on in this whole day.
It's a pleasure to host you. Sometimes it gives us a chance to reflect on why things are important.
Absolutely.
And it's wonderful to have the opportunity to share it with everybody
Yeah.
in a way that's so welcoming.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I know I'm not alone in this. So if you've been there, if you've been dismissed, ignored, or told it's just bad periods, I see you. Drop your story below, not just to vent, but to show the world how many of us are out there. Because here's the thing, this is bigger than a video. Every comment, every share, every person who speaks up makes it harder for the medical world to ignore us. Look, I started this channel to uncover the science that matters, the science that gets buried because it's about women or peers or anything else deemed uncomfortable. Turns out the uncomfortable stuff, that's where the breakthroughs are hiding. If you want to be part of uncovering more hidden science with me, you know what to do, but more importantly, share this, send it to your group chat, post it on your story, tag that friend who's been suffering, because the only way this changes is if we make it impossible to ignore. The future of women's healthcare is literally within us. So let's not waste another drop of potential. Thanks for watching.